Hi, my name is Amanda, and I'll be talking about police records check. So, what is a police record check? A police record check is a search in the police database records about an individual. There are three types of police record checks available in Ontario: a criminal record check, a criminal record and judicial matters check, and a vulnerable sector check. Let's talk about each one of these in more detail. Let's begin with the criminal record check. This is your most basic police record check available. It reveals information about criminal convictions, findings of guilt under the Youth Criminal Justice Act, and it's usually required for employment purposes, bylaw license, or immigration purposes. Moving along, we have a criminal record and judicial matters check. This reveals all the information from the criminal record check, along with absolute and conditional discharges, outstanding charges, arrest warrants, and certain judicial orders. This is for applicants who are seeking employment or volunteer positions. For example, someone applying for a position on the board of directors. Next, we have our vulnerable sector check. This is the only one that is mandatory underneath the Criminal Records Act, which requires a vulnerable sector check be performed for a paid or volunteer position only when that position is one of authority or trust relative to those children or vulnerable persons. But what is a vulnerable person? Well, a vulnerable person is someone who is 18 years of age or younger and or is in a position of dependency and is otherwise at a greater risk than the general population of being harmed by a person in a position of trust or authority. So, for example, someone with Down syndrome is considered a vulnerable person. So, what is found in the vulnerable sector check? Well, it includes all the information from your criminal record and judicial matters check, along with non-criminal court findings, record suspensions for sexual offense convictions, and non-conviction information. So I've prepared a little trivia. Feel free to stop the video and play along. True or false? Employers can just request a police record check. The answer is false. Consent is required. According to the Police Record Checks Reform Act, a police record check provider shall not conduct a police record check in the respect of an individual unless the request contains the individual's written consent to that particular type of check. Next question. You can be denied a job because of a criminal record. Yes, in some situations, or no. The answer is in some situations. We'll talk about this more later on in the presentation. True or false? For employment purposes, there is a fee for requesting a police record check. The answer is true. Prices do vary. It could cost anywhere from $15 to $45. If you are considering on implementing a police record check, you should take this into consideration. You might hire 10, 20, or hundreds of employees, and each police record check does cost money and it does take time. So this is something to take into consideration, especially if you are looking for an immediate hire. Should a police check report be mandatory? Well, it depends. Each organization is different. As I mentioned before, price and time is something to consider. There are two other things you should also consider if you do plan on implementing a police record check. One is the Human Rights Code. If you do plan on implementing a police record check and you do find that they do have a past of committing offenses, you cannot let that get in the way of you making a decision whether to hire that person or not. Under the Human Rights Code, a person cannot be discriminated against employment because of record of offenses. So that is the one thing to keep in mind. The other thing that was mentioned in the trivia is there is an exception to discriminating someone because of a record of offenses. That is a bona fide occupational requirement, which is a standard rule or factor that is essential to performing the duties of a particular position. For example, being a good driver is essential to becoming a bus driver. So if someone has a record of hit and runs or has their driving license suspended and that shows up on the police record check, you can decide not to hire that person because it is essential for performing that job. So let's look at McDonald's. Before 2016, McDonald's did not implement a police record check, but in 2016, McDonald's had hired a convicted child sex offender and was being criticized by Australian Senator Darren Hinch. McDonald's reacted quickly, and within 24 hours, they had fired that employee, and they decided to implement a background check for all adult employees moving forward. So in this example, we can see that implementing a police record check does keep not only their customers safe, but also employees at McDonald's safe. And it's also good for avoiding situations like this that will appear on the news and impact the company's image. Another example is Western. Western University does implement a police vulnerable sector check at Schulich. but this is because it is mandatory. It's underneath the Criminal Records Act. This is because all students working at Schulich Dentistry will be working with vulnerable persons, so they do have to perform a police sector check. So thank you for listening, and I hope you learned a little bit about police record checks.